Welcome, everyone. We're having people join in. I just see the numbers of attendees going up quickly here. We have 176 people registered for this webinar, so that's exciting. And I want to welcome you. My name is Michelle Lentz. I'm the co-founder and president of the Child Protection League. And on behalf of the Child Protection League, I welcome you to this Title IX briefing. I'm joined by a couple of my colleagues, Julie Quist and Bonnie Gasper, who are helping with today's webinar. Child Protection League is in its 11th year. Our mission is to protect children from indoctrination, exploitation, and violence. And we do this by educating and equipping citizens to take action to protect children and to reclaim our self-governance, to expose and defeat the cultural revolution that is in our midst. I'd like you to know a couple of things as we get started here. First, a recording of this briefing will be made available to everyone who is registered, and we will send you a link to that as soon as we have it ready. You may notice that there's a Q&A icon in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And so if you have questions during the webinar, please type them into the Q&A, and we will try to get as many questions answered by Eileen O'Connor, our presenter today. There's also a brief poll in the poll section. You will see an icon for that. Feel free to take the poll. It helps us to improve what we do. And I am happy at this time to introduce to you Julie Quist, who will be facilitating this briefing with Lee. Julie is a co-founder and chair of the Child Protection League Board of Directors. She goes back to the beginning, a brilliant person. We couldn't do this work without her, and I'm excited to be able to introduce all of you to her. So Julie, without any more delay, I'll hand this webinar over to you, and you can introduce Lee.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you, Michelle. I just wanted everyone here to know that the Title IX federal civil rights law, it's been a major player in America's education system since the early 70s, has actually is in the process of they're attempting to transform it completely from being a protection of women and girls into an assault on women and girls and boys and men. So this is an update on how that is going. There was a network of groups across the country that connected to oppose these regulations coming down from the Biden administration's federal Department of Education. And this would involve any school, any educational institute that takes any federal money. So that is pretty comprehensive. So Child Protection League is a part of that national network as well. But our speaker today is Eileen O'Connor. She's known to her friends as Lee, so we'll call her Lee. And Lee is a CPA and a lawyer. She's a key member of the Title IX network that I just was referring to. So we are incredibly honored to have Lee as our distinguished presenter today. She has quite a background, and I'll just read from her bio here. After nearly 30 years as a national tax consultant with the IRS National Office and major accounting firms, in 2001, President George W. Bush nominated and the Senate confirmed Lee to be the Assistant Attorney General for the Tax Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. She served in that position for 6 years, leading the more than 600 men and women of that division in enforcing the tax laws through civil litigation and criminal prosecution in federal courts. Since 2007, Lee has engaged in the private practice of law and written commentaries that have been published in the Wall Street Journal, the Hill newspaper, the Washington Examiner, and the online publication American Greatness. Last September, Lee testified at the House Oversight Committee impeachment inquiry hearing about the Department of Justice's obstruction of the Internal Revenue Service's investigation into the Hunter Biden's apparent tax crimes. So today, how is that relevant for today? Lee's American Greatness column was entitled "Abolishing Women's Rights One at a Time," about the intrusion of a man claiming to identify as a woman into a 150-year-old sorority at the University of Wyoming. So Lee's Washington Examiner column concerned the inadequacy of current indecent exposure and peeping Tom laws to protect women and girls in such places as public swimming pools, locker rooms, etc. So without any further ado, I would like to bring forward, Lee, would you like to open up there you go. And we have here Lee O'Connor, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you for setting the foundation for our talk today. And congratulations to the Child Protection League. I'm so impressed by what you all have managed to accomplish. You've got a really informative website, which I refer to on a regular basis. Why are we here today? We're gathered here together to talk about the Title IX proposed regulations, which we understand the Biden administration has signaled that it is going to finalize next month. I'm going to talk in 4 segments: where we are now, how we got here, what's next, and what we can do. So where we are now is the Title IX proposed regulations are going to be finalized, the government tells us, next month. They were published in July 2022. In April 2023, a second set of Title IX regulations was proposed, having to do with sports alone. It's only that first set, though, that the Biden administration says it's going to finalize next month. Now, what is Title IX? As Julie said, Title IX was enacted in 1972, and it prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex by any educational institution that accepts federal financial assistance. What else was happening in 1972? Well, in 1972, the Congress was considering an amendment to the Constitution, the Equal Rights Amendment. James Buckley, then a senator, argued against the amendment on the Senate floor. And he said that our laws contain protections for women and girls because they're women and girls. And to enact or add the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution would abolish those protections, which were put into the law for a very good reason. Another thing that was happening in 1972 is Gloria Steinem, angry that you could always tell whether a woman was married by what you had to call her, but you couldn't tell whether a man was married. You know, men are always Mr. Brown or Mr. Smith, but women would be Miss or Mrs. Smith or Brown. And she didn't think that was fair. So she railed against that, started a magazine called Ms. And it's on that foundation that Title IX of the Education Amendments was enacted. And that is what the Biden administration proposes to implement new regulations about. Well, what else is going on? Those regulations have not gone into effect yet. They were only proposed in 2022. In the meantime, what's happening is, as Julie said, I've written a couple of articles about the fact that there is a 150-year-old sorority, a chapter of it in Wyoming, which has admitted a man. The Daughters of the American Revolution is going to admit men who can submit retroactively falsified birth certificates claiming that they really are women. They're going to be Daughters of the American Revolution. This is not happening in a vacuum. It is not just the United States that is going down this track. Several countries in Europe have enacted what they call gender recognition acts, requiring people to accept the representations of people that they are the sex they claim to be, notwithstanding evidence to the contrary. The Department of Education is pushing curriculums out to schools, demanding that children as young as 4 years old be taught that you might be born in the wrong body. Your brain might not be matching the rest of your body. Gender is a spectrum. You can change your sex. Children are being taught this in schools, leading to the rise in the phenomenon of transgenderism that we have seen. The Health and Human Services Department, the United States Department of Agriculture, the Office of Personnel Management, which provides the rules for the relationship between federal agencies and their employees, have all issued employee manuals and other documents informing employees that they will respect the pronouns that they are being asked to use, that people can use the bathrooms that they feel like using that day, depending on their gender self-identification that day. No proof required. And people who do not comply with these rules are going to be found, or can be found guilty of creating a hostile work environment and lose their jobs. So how did we get here? Sometimes you'll see a singer who's just burst forth upon the music scene being asked, wow, how do you account for your overnight success? And invariably, they always say, let's see, my overnight success is probably the result of that 20 years of hard work I've been putting in. And the same is true here. The Title IX regulations are just a piece. They're just what we're looking at now. And the preamble, every set of proposed regulations has a preamble which explains why they're being proposed. And these proposed regulations cite the 2020 Supreme Court decision in Bostock for the reason that sex is being redefined to include sexual orientation and gender identity. They say that they're just following the Supreme Court's decision in Bostock. When the Bostock decision was first written, I thought that Justice Gorsuch, who authored the opinion, I thought this distorted reasoning was the figment of his own imagination, but I have discovered upon my research that no, he was actually parroting the analysis and rationale of the Obama administration. Sex equals sexual orientation and gender identity has been going on for a decade or more. In 2012, the Obama administration advised people that receive money from the Housing and Urban Development Department that if they have battered women's shelters or homeless shelters and they take federal money, they have to let people be in whatever facility they want to be in based on whatever they claim to be. So that if you've got a battered women's shelter and a man comes and says he identifies as a woman, he has to be let in there, regardless the feelings of the battered women in there. That was in 2012. As early as 2014 and maybe even earlier, the Department of Education was responding to inquiries from teachers. What do we do with this boy who wants to be in the girls' classes or in the girls' restroom? And the Department of Education responded, you cannot, under Title IX, you cannot discriminate on the basis of sex, which includes sexual orientation and gender identity. So the Obama administration was doing this in 2014. So when the Biden administration, through every federal agency, tells you that it is just making these changes because the Bostock Supreme Court decision says it has to, that's nonsense. It's absolutely not true. Now, before the government can impose a new regulation, it must follow, or it's supposed to follow, the Administrative Procedure Act, which requires that it propose the regulation, that it allow the public to comment on the regulation, that it consider the comments before it finalizes the regulation and explains in the preamble to that final regulation how it has responded to the comments it received. When the Biden administration published the July 2022 Title IX regulations, changing the definition of sex, it inspired a tsunami of comment. 250,000 comments were submitted in response to that regulation. The April 22 sports regulation inspired 140,000 comments. These are record-breaking numbers. The comments were not all negative, mind you. But again, the Title IX regulations is only one of the ways that the Biden administration is imposing this sex equals sexual orientation and gender identity definition. They've been doing it, as I mentioned, in employee manuals and in other ways. Some of the ways they have been doing it is sending out to state attorneys general, to educators, Dear Educator letters. They publish a notice of interpretation. They publish Q&As, frequently asked questions. And in each of those, they have been claiming that sex is equal to sexual orientation and gender identity. before the Title IX regulations were proposed in July 22, the government had been issuing these letters to state officials saying, and we're going to cut off your federal educational funds unless you do this, unless you do that. No more lunch money for you, or whatever the financial assistance was. Tennessee led a group of 18 or 19 states suing the federal government, saying, we have all these letters from you, we have this interpretation from you, this is unlawful, you cannot change the words in a statute on your own. And so they sued to enjoin the implementation of those Dear Colleague, Dear Educator letters. And the United States District Court in the Eastern District of Tennessee enjoined the implementation of those rules, those limitations. The government appealed to the Sixth Circuit. The appeal in the Sixth Circuit was argued April 2023. There has been no response to that. I'll mention, though, this is such a contentious topic. Tennessee led this group of 18 or 19 states and got the injunction that only applies to those states. When the appeal went to the Sixth Circuit, California and Minnesota and 16 other states plus DC came in on the other side, on the side of what the government is trying to do here. So we have, this is, the country is pretty much evenly divided about whether this is a good idea or not. 4 commissioners on the United States Commission on Civil Rights, UCCR, 4 of those commissioners wrote to Speaker McCarthy in 2023 and said, look at these regulations that the Biden administration has proposed. They are unlawful. The administration does not have the authority to redefine sex in this manner with all these consequences that it's going to have. So Speaker McCarthy responded, said, oh, not to worry, not to worry. We've got this proposed legislation on that we're working on. It's HR 734, protection of women and girls in sports. Well, that's fine. And the House passed it, period. That's the end of it. Lip service. That's all that's happened. They did not hold hearings. They just passed that one bill, and that's the end of it. Looking at my notes here, there's so much that I want to tell you about. So what's next? The next thing is that the government can finalize the regulations, and that will mean that the proposed regulations that we saw will be reissued. There might be some changes in them, but the government is supposed to respond to the comments that were submitted. It'll be interesting to see how they do so, and whether that response actually includes any changes to these proposed regulations. Once the regulations are finalized, the agency is supposed to send them to Congress, which, in accordance with the Congressional Review Act, will do just that, review the regulations and perhaps put the kibosh on them. But that requires both houses of Congress to agree to that and the president to sign it. It's happened only once that the Congressional Review Act has successfully been used to put the kibosh on a set of regulations issued by a government agency. There will be court challenges, no doubt. As I mentioned, this is an absolute global problem. It's not just us, it's governments across, well, not across the entire world, but largely the English-speaking world and Europe are all dealing with this issue. So what can we do? Make sure that everyone you know knows what you know about this. One of the problems that we have, I want to say in this country, but really probably anywhere, is you don't know what's going on until it hits you. And luckily, there have been enough news reports of things that have happened to people that we are learning that these things are happening. We are learning that children are being transitioned at school. States are passing parental rights laws requiring school districts not to keep secret from parents that their children are suffering from gender confusion. However, make yourself known to not only your federal lawmakers, but also your state lawmakers and your state and local officials. The Title IX network in which I participate has discovered that even when a state has enacted laws requiring parental notification if a child is suffering from gender confusion and wants to use a different name or different pronouns, school districts are not doing it. It's state law, but they're not doing it. They are continuing to abide by old protocols which require the teachers to keep secrets. And you may have seen some of the stories where children are actually taken from a parent's home when the parent does not, quote unquote, affirm the child's gender identity. I put quotes around affirm because that's another one of the points that I want to make. Do not use the language that the people on the other side are using. To affirm something is to assert that it is true. If you affirm to a boy that he really is a girl, that's not affirming. That's not an assertion that it is true. Gender, and even lawmakers are doing this. They are passing laws prohibiting, for example, gender affirming procedures and surgeries. They're not gender affirming. So don't let your lawmakers do it. Don't do it yourself. Don't adopt the language of the left. Do not use the adjective or the modifier cis. To say that somebody is cisgender or a cis woman or a cis man is to pretend that there is some other kind. There isn't. Don't use their language. That is a concession to them. You might remember a few months ago, Fifth Circuit Judge Kyle Duncan was roundly protested at Stanford University. The reason he was protested at Stanford was because he had rendered an opinion as a judge on the Sixth Circuit. There was a prisoner who was doing time for child pornography who decided he wanted to be treated as though he were a woman. He wanted to change his name to a woman's name. He wanted to be referred to as a female. And the case came before Judge Duncan and two others in the 3-judge panel on the Fifth Circuit. And Judge Duncan said that he was not going to engage the federal judiciary in this exercise. And that's why he was protested at Stanford. But he was right. We must, as part of preserving our society and our culture, we must also preserve our language. Now, when the effective date of the Title IX regulations was postponed, they came out July 2022. They were going to be finalized in spring 2023, got put off to fall 2023. Now it's put off again to March 2024, next month. A lot of people celebrated about that as though they had a fabulous victory. They didn't. It was like they had done a touchdown, scored a touchdown. They didn't. They didn't even get a first down. All that happened is they kept the other side from gaining more of their ground. That was not a victory. Now, notwithstanding the football analogies, this is not a game. It will never end. The victory will only be achieved over time through eternal vigilance to protect the freedom to raise our children with the values that we know to be true. Now, I've tried to include a lot of information and also leave time for Q&A. So I will stop there. I do have, let me just mention one more thing. There are so many people who have dealt with on a personal level who you can learn a lot from. A woman named Erin Friday she's not practicing law anymore because she gave it up to save her child. Her child had been transitioned at school, which she learned about because of COVID. She was, her child was on the computer at home having lessons, and she heard her child being referred to by a male name. And she looked into it and discovered that teachers at the school were treating her little girl as though she were a little boy. Erin Friday took her child out of school, took away all her devices, and over a period of time and a lot of work, saved her child from the gender radicals. But it's that sort of vigilance that you need. Erin Friday, you can find a YouTube of a speech she gave just earlier this week. She has she started an organization called Protect Kids CA, short for California, protectkidsca.com. She's got a lot of information there. She has put together a petition that she wants to go on. You know, there are a lot of ballot initiatives in California. She is trying to get a ballot initiative done to protect kids, and the powers that be, unfortunately, are able to change the name of your ballot initiative. So it's no longer Protect Kids, it's called Restricting Trans Kids' Rights. But she's trying to get that on the ballot. Anyway, there are so many things that we can do and we must do, and we might win the next skirmish. But that's not going to be the end of it. We must stay vigilant. This is a global fight. I'll pause there.
Very good. So let me just ask a question of you. Could you be a little, just some specific, like exactly what will this mean for schools, for like K-12 schools, if this is passed? Like, for example, in Minnesota now, we are under a lot of these. Now, we already are, because of state law. Minnesota is under, you know, a very, I don't know, very, very radical trifecta. But there are many red states that are, you know, at this point are trying, as you mentioned, are trying to make it impossible for, are trying to ban that sort of thing, that, you know, the men in the boys in the girls' bathrooms and things like that. So what will happen in those states, specifically in the K-12 schools? And then I'd like you to ask you a question about how this will affect post-secondary schools.
Sure. It's hard to anticipate all the repercussions. We use boys and girls bathrooms as sort of a shorthand for some of the things that have already happened and they're sort of obvious to happen. But basically, Title IX just says thou shalt not discriminate on the basis of sex. And the Biden administration and the Obama administration before it says sex includes sexual orientation and gender identity. So if a girl can do something and a boy, but only girls can do something, and, you know, sports is the most obvious example. The use of girls' facilities is another obvious example. If a girl can play in this game or go into that facility and a boy says he's a girl, then he can too. So that's the most obvious. And how it applies in secondary, well, the secondary education, Title IX has even more ramifications, which we didn't talk about today because your focus is K-12. But for secondary education, another focus of Title IX is how schools, how educations of higher learning should handle allegations of sexual misconduct, and sexual assault. And during the Trump administration, Betsy DeVos reissued regulations. The Obama administration had issued regulations implementing that part of Title IX. And pretty much it's kind of a the boy is always guilty kind of result under the Obama era regulations. Betsy DeVos came in and established due process so that someone accused of sexual assault or sexual misconduct has an opportunity to know who's accusing them, what the accusation is, what the details are, have a hearing, question any witnesses. And one of the things that these Title IX revised regulations do is undo all of that. So once again, no due process in secondary education. And what was your other question?
Yeah, it was just specifically how would it impact that? I have a follow-up on that. Is okay, so the problems that you encounter in K-12 will also be true for colleges and universities.
Yeah.
And how will it affect private colleges and universities, for example, Christian colleges? And so if we're talking about like dorm rooms, for example, you know, are they going to require transgender students to be in the dorm, you know, mixed dorms that way? And, you know, so how will it affect all those kinds of things in the post-secondary, which is the colleges and universities? And are they aware of this? Are the colleges and universities, the private colleges and universities, aware that, I mean, a lot of them are already probably doing this, except for the private and Christian colleges and universities. Do they know that this is like on the brink of coming?
You know, I am disappointed sometimes when I see the reactions. There are some schools that are they're caught flat-footed, and I really wish that they had somebody keeping an eye on what the government is about to do to them. Let me take a few of those. The private. Let me go from private to religious. One of the things that the Biden administration is doing is stripping out not only of Title IX, but of other applications of other laws, stripping out the exemption for religious institutions, like in Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, for example. There had been, or there is now, and until the regulations are finalized, stripping it out, there is a provision that permits, like, Catholic hospitals not to do abortions. And the Biden administration is stripping those things away. Now, about the private institutions, it's even worse than you might think. Hillsdale, for example, you might see it advertised. It's a wonderful school, gives a fabulous education, and it doesn't take any federal money at all. And federal money for these purposes includes federally guaranteed student loans. I mean, if you want to go to Hillsdale, you got to figure out a way to do it other than getting a federally guaranteed student loan, because Hillsdale wants nothing to do with government regulations on education. However, some students I think it was the students that are bringing this case, saying, well, Hillsdale is tax exempt, and isn't that kind of federal financial assistance just merely being tax exempt? And that is still in process. It's very early days for that. We don't know how that's going to turn out, but it is you put your finger on a big problem that private schools don't seem to know that this applies to them too. And yes, they are. I read of I think it was a Christian school in Iowa that has men's and women's separate dorms, and a guy claimed that he identified as a female and he wanted to live in the women's dorms. And I think what happened is he was allowed to do that because the federal government came in and said, sexual orientation and gender identity, can't discriminate, even though we still have the old Title IX regulations. The new ones haven't gone into effect yet, but that hasn't stopped the Biden administration from coming in and throwing its weight around in whatever way it can.
Okay, so one of the questions that I have here is, will state laws be able to stop the Title IX implementation, like the private counseling and the pronoun mandates? Will that be an intermediate step? Can they get past that?
That's a very good point. Yeah, we have federalism. We have the states have authorities, and the federal government has authority. And there are times when federal law preempts state law, but this doesn't seem to be among those cases. And I would encourage, and I can send, if somebody wants to write to me, I can send them some documents. Probably the best the best thing to read on that point is the brief of Tennessee representing itself in 18 states, saying the federal government doesn't have the authority to do this. Education is something that we're in charge of, and the federal government, keep your school lunch. Well, they didn't say keep your school lunch money, but notwithstanding federal financial assistance, the federal government doesn't have the right to tell us how to run our schools, what rules we ought to go by. And I believe I've seen Florida Governor DeSantis sometime in the last week or so say words to that effect.
So there has to be some sort of state pushback on this, where they absolutely start refusing to comply. And we've seen this in other areas, like, for example, the border, where you have states deciding that we are going to protect our borders because this is our responsibility. We have the right to do that. It appears to me that has to be where it goes, is that states have to assume their own authority, which they have not been able or willing to do. And they maybe have federal money on the line. So this is coming in, in a lot of ways. The ERA, again, we're getting that legislation here in Minnesota. They want to have it. It's a equal rights for gender identity put in our Constitution. And I know the federal Congress is also thinking to do the same thing. Some people there's a question here that somebody has, is there anything that can be done at the local school board level that to protect children? Is there any way, any action that should be taken?
There is, and one of the gratifying things that's happened in the last couple of years is people getting really, really involved with their school districts, attending school board meetings, running to be on the school board. But that's the only answer, is that you've got to get involved yourself. The other answer, homeschooling has just skyrocketed the last couple of years as people, because of COVID, discovered what their kids were being exposed to and decided to unexpose them and protect them, which of course is the obligation of every parent.
So what would you think is the most effective and impactful thing that we can do right now? When we, in our follow-up email that we're sending out, we took one thing that was on the Title IX network material that said, here's something you can do. And we'll be sent, that'll go out automatically after this is over to everybody who is here. And that's just one thing. And specifically, what do you think that I think you kind of went over it quickly, like who should we be talking to? What should we be asking them? Informing them. I mean, what is the best way to address this for us all at a grassroots level? I mean, we're not all, I mean, some of us are legislators, some of us are school board members, some of us are just moms at home, some of us are, on committees, some of us, so we're a broad spectrum of people, but how can we be active right now?
Make yourself known to your school board, to your other local officials, to your mayor, to your county superintendent, to your state officials, to the attorneys general. The attorneys general are responsible for enforcing the laws of the state. And I mentioned earlier that some school districts, even in states that have mandated parental rights, the school districts are just totally ignoring that. And I don't think the attorneys general know about that. So know what your school district is actually doing. Get a copy of the school district's protocols. Every school district has a manual that its employees must follow. Find out what it says, get a copy of it. And if it doesn't specify that parents are to be informed of any issues with their children, including issues concerning gender confusion, then get it changed. And particularly, and if you're in a state that's got parental rights legislation and the school districts are not following it, get the attorney general to bring an action.
So, you mentioned this organization, Protect Kids CA, California. How do we replicate that here, or what can we do to find out more about what they're doing and how they're doing it?
Yeah, it's .com, by the way. You hear of a public organization like that and you think it might be .org, but it's .com. ProtectKidsCA.com. Go to the website and see what she's done. And it, California is a really it's a really dangerous state. One of the things that California wants to do, I don't think they've done it yet. Some other states are doing this in the Northeast, made themselves sanctuaries for kids whose parents won't let them, quote, transition, close quote, change sex, and or pretend to change sex or try to change sex. California wants to be a sanctuary for that. It wants to, any kid, not only for kids who want to transition, but also for surgeons who perform that obnoxious Frankenstein surgery. If it's against the law in your state, excuse me, if it's against the law in your state to perform mastectomies on 14-year-old girls and you get in trouble in your state for doing that, you can go to California and they will protect you. Not only can you do it there, but they will protect you from the from the state where you did it and it was against the law. I don't, quite frankly, think that's actually going to work because states are supposed to give each other full faith and credit. But California is agitating to become a trans child sanctuary. So you can run away if you're living in Texas and you can't trans, you can run away to California and do it there, and there's nothing your parents can do about it. Those things are going to be, we're going to see those in the courts.
Okay, yeah. So anyway, they can also come to Minnesota in 2023. That is exactly what Minnesota has become.
No, sorry.
Yeah, so people can come from anywhere, and we have very aggressive, what they call queer caucus here in the legislature. So they intend to push that more and more. So we're ahead of California there if they're not already there. I don't think we're the only state, but we are there already as of last year. So.
Wow, I didn't realize that. I think Vermont, New Hampshire, or Maine, or a combination of those have either done it or are in the process of doing that.
I think that New Hampshire, they defeated it. You know, it was a big deal. I think they defeated it, but I'm not an authority on that. You know, one of the questions that several people have been asking here is that how is it that something that is such a radical, dramatic change that can be done just by regulation instead of requiring a law to change it? And I know that's a topic that's been going on for many, many years, and it involves just about everything that we have from the federal government. But do you have a quick answer? What do you say to people who ask that? Because it is pretty outrageous. We have the same problem in state government.
Well, it's unlawful. It's unlawful, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I submitted comments on both of those sets of regulations, and one of my closing lines to the July 22 is, if Congress, no discrimination on account of sex. And to think that in 1972, that Congress and President Nixon, who signed it, actually meant sexual orientation and gender identity would be comical if the consequences weren't so catastrophic. So the answer, Julie, is they don't have the authority to do that. And that's why if it happens, it's going to have to be challenged in court. And we can hope and pray that we have judges who remember that laws are passed by Congress and that they cannot be changed by regulation. One of my final lines in one of my comments on the regulations was, if Congress wishes to surrender the American people to the current rate of radical gender ideology, it must amend the law to do so. Our elected representatives must hold hearings, invite public debate, and go on the record opposing girls' and women's rights to their own facilities and activities.
Very good. So we here in Minnesota are looking at what action and appeal that we can take when we have someone like a Keith Ellison, who's an attorney general for us in Minnesota. We are in a bad way. And so everybody's wondering, well, okay, we've got precinct caucuses coming up in less than a week, and there are resolutions that people want to put in, and how much will that, resolutions that go into the platform. But a lot of the time, those resolutions are good for educating people on what the topics are and why things are happening, and letting people know. Any of these topics could be brought up at the precinct caucus to inform people. But I think we have to recognize we're at a time where we are in the midst of a cultural revolution. Our rights are being taken away from. You said they can't do it. It's illegal. They are.
I didn't say they can't do it. They are doing it.
Well, I didn't mean they can't. They do. But that's the point. That's the point. And we have to, start asking, number one, what can we do individually to make people so aware of what they're subject to, so that they will refuse to cooperate, like school boards refusing, states refusing. At what level do we have where the levels of authority cannot comply with what they're being told they must, and pay the consequences, so that there is really a cultural pushback against all this, because there's not enough of a pushback. We have a lot of us here, who are here, who want to make a difference, trying to do what they can, but we're all in the midst of a population that, for the most part, do not recognize that this is right here, right now in their schools, and they need to be saying no, and in any level they can, and pay the consequences. That's my little thing. If you want to comment on that.
No, you're absolutely right. I agree 100%. And as I said at the outset, the singer who is accused of being an overnight success and says, "No, I've been working on this for 20 years." This has been sneaking up on us for decades. And as you and I were discussing before the webinar, you don't know it until it hits you personally, or it hits someone you know personally. And by that time, it's so ingrained. And one of the failures that we have, and one of the reasons this is able to continue the way it has, is the failure of education. I mean, our youngsters do not know how our government works. They don't know that there are 3 branches of government and each has a separate role to play. They don't know that we have a federal government and a state government, and that all rights and responsibilities not specifically designated for the federal government are reserved to the states. They don't know that. And you know what? It's not just our youngsters. You mentioned, in fact, I had put it in my bio and you read it, that I testified at the House Oversight Committee hearing on the impeachment inquiry. Seeing those representatives and listening to them and realizing how ignorant they are, members of Congress, about how our government is supposed to work is really, really, really disheartening. We've got to do a better job in our schools, all of our schools, public, private, homeschooling, about how our government works. Because right now it's not working because people don't appreciate how it's supposed to work.
So, when Trump was, put his when he was President Trump, put out his ruling on immigration, and a judge just halted it with a decision saying, no, you can't do that. It's all up. Well, can something like that happen here?
Absolutely. And I'd like to, as long as we brought up that executive order, one of the problems we have is the way in which developments are reported in the press. The ban on immigrants from certain countries, it was not a ban on immigrants from Muslim countries. It was a ban on immigrants from countries who are so poorly organized and so poorly run that you cannot tell who is coming. There are countries in the world where people don't know when they were born. They don't know who their parents are. And there are no records. And it was those countries, which happened to be Muslim, that I think they were all Muslim, but it was not because they were Muslim. It's because you couldn't vet them. You could not tell who these people are because there are no documents. So, and so you mentioned it as it was reported in the press, and that's absolutely not what it was. Anyway, so what was the question?
So can the courts put a halt to this in the same way, regardless of what it was? The courts stepped in and said, we're going to put a halt on your executive order. You cannot do that. Can that happen here?
They can, but will they? Remember, President Obama talked about his pen and his phone. Do you know that DACA and DAPA, the children and parents of illegal aliens who had been in the United States for a while, his action that they could stay, deferred action for child arrivals, deferred action for parents of child arrivals, he never put even a pen to that. He might have put a phone to it, but he just had his head of Homeland Security send a message to the people who run the districts: do not send these people home. And that's the same thing that Obama did with the sex means sexual orientation and gender identity. And so in DACA and DAPA, there wasn't even a pen involved. And yet, when the Trump administration tried to repeal it, there wasn't really anything to repeal, but it was as a practice that the Obama administration had started. The courts said, oh, no, people have been relying on this. You can't undo this. So we have structures in place for things to happen properly, but they are not always followed. And for things to be working well, every single link of the chain needs to be acting properly, and that's just not happened.
So other countries seem to be moving away from the child surgery treatments, and they cite science isn't there to defend it. And so is there any thoughts on whether state administrators could be held accountable for the crimes against the children based on the lack of scientific evidence? I mean, are they really immune from prosecution?
I don't know whether they are or not. I mean, they'll probably try to argue that. The organization, WPATH, that is responsible for all the studies saying that that mutilating children is a wonderful thing and they'll kill themselves if you don't let it happen, though that if you look at the members of that group, you realize they're not all doctors. And even to the extent they are doctors, they're not necessarily well respected. They're people who are transgender activists, and they are promoting this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Now here I have a question. Somebody's asking, isn't it true that Bostock only applies to Title VII employment, not Title IX?
That's what Gorsuch wrote in his opinion. And anyone who read the opinion knew that it wasn't going to stay there. Justice Alito wrote a very eloquent dissent. And one of the things he mentioned is that it's not going to stay in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's going to be used everywhere. And sure enough, when you look at the documents, the guidances that the Biden administration has issued through a dozen different agencies, they all cite Bostock, and they all say, and this is our authority, even though they are applying it to something entirely different. Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, for example, or Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. The Bostock decision is being applied across the board. Anytime discrimination on the basis of sex is an issue, it is applied, not just in the employment scenario, which is what Title VII of the Civil Rights Act is about.
Well, I think we'll call it over for now, but I want everybody to know that they can go to our website for more information. There isn't an awful lot of Title IX on our website right now, so we're going to put this briefing up. You can get a copy of this from us after we get it together, which shouldn't take very long, and share it with people. But we are obviously being taken over by forces that are totalitarian, and they are undermining our children. Our children are targeted. They are the targets of this revolution, and we call it a Marxist revolution because the whole thing is putting people into oppressor and oppressed groups, pitting them against each other, and stirring controversy and conflict and division between people for the purpose of undermining our country. And so what we're looking at is where they're taking all of our options away from us. We cannot comply. I mean, we have to be able to energize the public to resist this in every way we can. I don't have any easy answers, but one of the things we have to do is let them know where this is. I mean, your local school, your local private school, your college, your private college. All of these things are going to be involved in these regulatory changes that are happening, not just here, but in a lot of other places. So one of the questions that a legislator had is, which states have the most effective legislation on this issue, as far as you know? Are there any particular, or are you not familiar with that enough?
I don't really know. Alabama passed one of the early laws against mutilation of children, but and then there were parental notification laws. I do think, and I can provide you to send out with your email. I can probably provide you some links to places that do have information like that.
Okay, well, very good. Michelle, is there anything that I have missed here before we sign off? Otherwise, I just thank everybody for coming. It's just been really an honor to have you, Lee, here, and we're just so grateful for the work you're doing, and all of the people out there who are working very hard and doing what they can to, to interpose themselves against this attack on our children and our young people, on their education, on their very identities. And so we just thank you very much, and I'll just call it a close. Good night, everybody, or good afternoon, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks, Julie. Bye-bye.